diabetes, I know we touched on it when we were in class at the second one, which was awesome. Mason did a really good presentation on all the different conditions that we come across in our own holder and also with our whānau too. So I just wanted to maybe dig in a little bit deeper about diabetes and kind of find out what you guys know and don't know around what it is, the different types, and who's at risk and what else can we do. So just to throw it out there, does anyone have any whānau that are affected by diabetes? No, I'm not even. I do. I don't know if anyone else does. I can't hear anyone today. Just checking. Okay, they're all muted. Okay, that's fine. Sorry. You'd think by the stage of our series we would have all the technology under control, but hey, then it's me presenting, so there's always going to be some faux pas. And how else you got a new computer. Anyway, so let's get into it. What is diabetes? So diabetes is when there is far too much glucose in the blood, and maybe one-off this would be okay, but over an extended period of time it starts to cause us some complications. So the increase in glucose in our blood comes from when we eat kai. It goes through our digestive system and it enters the bloodstream, and then the pancreas role is really to produce the insulin, to take the glucose out of the blood and move it to where we need it to be, to use it for energy. So when we have diabetes, the pancreas is actually unable to make enough effective insulin. And when I say effective, you know, there's different things that are going to interfere with either the amount that's produced or how it can work and get that glucose to where it needs to be. So okay, so you'll see in this picture, you know, we've got our kai that we eat. So say we've just had like a hearty feast, and there's been some kumara or some potatoes, maybe some bread or cereals in there. So this carbohydrate food is actually where our glucose comes from. So the digestive process starts from the moment that you start to produce saliva and continues all the way through until the other end when things get passed out. But anyway, so we have our kai, gets broken down, and the glucose gets released from the food. So normally when we eat, the particles go through lots of different processes, but glucose is the smallest one that it finally gets to, and it's the one that we need to use for energy. That feeds our brain so that we can be sharp and go through our day. So it becomes absorbed through the intestinal wall and into the bloodstream. Once it's in there, once there's a certain amount of the glucose in the bloodstream, the pancreas is signaled to release some insulin. And the insulin's role is really to take the glucose and put it into the cells or the different muscle cells or tissues so that we can use it and feed our muscles with some energy. So in a normal person, this happens really quite quickly, quite automatic. However, in a diabetic, things start to slow down. The pancreas perhaps doesn't produce enough insulin, or there might be things inhibiting the way that it works with the glucose. Okay. So there's two main types of diabetes that we hear about. One is type 1 or insulin-dependent diabetes, and the second one is non-insulin dependent diabetes. So type 1, you may have heard, is usually with diagnosed at a young age. However, we are seeing more and more of our so type 2 is the one, getting all confused. Type 1 is diagnosed at really early on in life, and you can't really cure it, so you would end up having insulin injections and things like that. So they can't really make any, or sometimes even a very, very small amount of insulin, and they require injections and a healthy diet to go through their life well without suffering too many consequences. For type 2, this is the one where it has more of a lifestyle factor influence. So usually it's developed later on in life. I think for Māori, the main ages that you get diagnosed are, say, in your 40s to 50s. However, we are seeing more and more kids become type 2 diabetics. So the main difference is, one, it's kind of genetic, and the other one, and you're born with it, and that's just the way it is. Type 2 is one that could be either prevented or it might just develop. There is another one that's quite important as well, and that is gestational diabetes, or diabetes during pregnancy. And it's kind of like a little warning shot or warning sound for our mamas to let them know that, hey, you could actually get full-blown diabetes in a couple of years, and it is really important to diagnose it, or to even be aware of it, that it could occur. Currently, there's about 5% of all pregnancies in Aotearoa that are affected by gestational diabetes. And I guess the main concern is, there's complications during the pregnancy, but also going on further in life, not just for the mum, but also for the pepe. And they could both develop type 2 diabetes in quite a short time frame, actually, only in about the next 10 years. So currently, there's only a few that are at risk that are screened. However, it really should be for any hapu mama, and it can actually have such a huge impact going forward. So why does it happen? There's a lot of hormonal changes, obviously, that happen when you're pregnant to ensure that there's a steady supply of glucose or fuel to pepe. But mum can also develop a type of insulin resistance, so her body can't make enough insulin to keep up with all the glucose. And I think the increase in insulin needs is like 3 times the amount that you would normally need before you were pregnant, or even after. So it is quite a different type of diabetes, because it is only through that 9 months that you might develop it. And I guess another thing to remember is that, baby is always favoured over mum. So whatever she has, she's going to give it all to baby, because that's where all the nutrients and the fuel need to go first, to ensure that they grow and survive and develop the way they should. So, like I touched on before, there's health implications for mama and pepe during the pregnancy, and then also going forward. So during pregnancy, baby can gain too much fat. A larger baby obviously is going to increase difficulties in the delivery. There's a lot more babies being born through cesarean because of pregnancy and diabetes. It can also create some breathing difficulties and jaundice at birth for baby as well. And also because they've been in such a high glucose environment when they're in the womb, when they come out, they don't have that. So they actually go into a hypo, or what we would call having really low blood sugar when they're born. So different things to be aware of. Mama's also, her risks increase as well, so she could have higher blood pressure during pregnancy too, and also those long-term risks like I mentioned after birth. So your mum's increased risk now of getting type 2 diabetes, and also I think baby has maybe a 4 times greater risk of developing diabetes throughout their life too. Other complications or other things is that it can help dictate whether baby's going to be a person that puts on weight really easily, or may in the future get like cardiovascular disease, so those types of things. So for pregnancy during diabetes, it currently only people that are at risk get getting screened. So people over 25, people who are, mamas who are Māori or Pacifica, who have had multiple births, that kind of thing, they'll get targeted. But really, everyone that is pregnant should be getting screened as well, and that usually would happen about the 26 to 28 weeks mark. of gestation. The testing's not too intense, but it does involve a bit of time. So the mama's blood glucose is measured after they've consumed a glucose drink, so a sugary drink. They might have to wait a few hours, and then they get tested. So when they fail that, they might have to redo another type of test, which is when they fast first for 2 hours and then come in and get it. So maybe overnight they just haven't had anything to eat. Anyway, I'll move on from that and just kind of talk you through what a normal glucose and insulin relationship looks like. So you'll see here I've got a big long tube. That's just to represent our blood vessel, our blood supply. There's 2 little cells down the bottom here. So in a normal person, we've had our kai, we just ate a perimeter or something, maybe a banana, and once it's gone through the digestive system, the glucose gets released into the blood, and then following that, when the pancreas is signaled to release insulin, and it comes, and its job is to kind of open the door, unlock the cell, so that the glucose can come on through. So once it gets into the muscle cell, we get lots of energy. So you'll see these flashing sort of cells. So now we can use this energy to do all the things that we like to do in life. Think, move, run, whatever. Okay, so really, that was a really simple way of kind of showing you what happens when we have type 1, or we have a dysfunctional pancreas. Because again, we've eaten our kai, the glucose is being released into the blood. However, there might not be enough insulin that is released by the pancreas, or sometimes there's none at all. So you'll see that those little glucose molecules there just bounce back because there was no insulin there to take the glucose into the cell, to sort of open the door for the glucose to get in. So instead, the glucose stays in the bloodstream, and that's where we'll start to see some problems. Yeah. Okay, so that was type 2. Next one. Yeah. Okay, so when we have type 2, so perhaps, we develop this a little bit later on in life, got a bit of weight around us or something, we will release some insulin after we've eaten, but we won't necessarily release enough to meet up with the demand or the amount of glucose that is in our blood. So some of our glucose is going to get into where it needs to be, and the rest is going to stay trapped. So you'll get a little bit of energy, and you'll also get some glucose just floating around up to no good. Yeah. Another type is insulin resistant. So again, it's a type of type 2 diabetes, but this is where we might be having a little bit of extra, a little bit of extra weight around us. So you'll see here there's this yellow circle around our cells now, and this is to represent, say, maybe having a little bit too much fat around our organs and around some of our muscle cells and things. And so again, we have our kai, our glucose comes rushing into our blood. Super excited to get into our cells to make some things happen. Insulin is released. However, the fat or the weight we're carrying actually blocks or makes it a little bit harder for the insulin to do its job. Analogy I've had used before is, it kind of changes the way that the lock is. So, somebody changed the locks to your house and you can no longer use the key, or maybe it's getting a bit rusty or something. So you'll get some glucose going in, but it's not as effective as it once was. On a positive note, exercise is kind of a really good way to increase the amount of glucose we can get out of our blood and into the cells where we need it. Again, we eat our food, glucose comes rushing in, insulin is produced, and then say we go and do some exercise, maybe we go for a walk, maybe we run up the stairs, I'm not sure, but it kind of, there's an increased demand for the glucose, so the cell kind of opens its back door and will let the glucose come in. So it is a way to increase our cell's hunger for the glucose, because it needs to get in there, it needs to move, it needs to think, it needs to make things happen. So yeah, exercise, regular exercise is obviously a really good way of helping control the amount of glucose in our blood and help control some of the symptoms we might get from diabetes. Alright, so some of the characteristics of diabetes, differences between the two. Yeah, I do apologize before when I was getting all confused. But type 1 is usually, you're diagnosed probably by the age of 7 to maybe 15. Some people do get diagnosed a little bit later, but generally it's something they have for life, and they usually, well, they always have to have insulin, and so you'll see them in monitoring what they eat and adjusting the insulin that they inject into their stomachs accordingly. And their pancreas is never going to be able to create enough insulin that they require, and they have to also do regular blood glucose monitoring. So you might have seen them, doing little finger prick tests and that kind of thing. They do have to stay really, really controlled in what they eat and what they do. Type 2, however, this can come with a bit more maturity. Yeah, like I said, the average age for being diagnosed is in between 40s to 50s years of age, and uncontrolled, it can really start to cause some havoc. But I guess the thing with type 2 is that there's so many variables that you could have a really extreme case and you might be having to have insulin. On the other hand, if you manage it well, you could just be, making sure you're exercising well and eating really well as well, and being in tune with your body. So there's a big spectrum, and it's not all doom and gloom if you do get diagnosed with type 2. So who's at risk? Some of them we can't change, our unmodifiable factors. So our family history, we can't actually undo that. Unfortunately, sometimes no. And also our risk increases with our age as well, like most things. Also, Māori and Pacifica, we're back up there again with being at greater risk, and also there are some gender differences too. Things we can change is our weight, staying active, and our levels of stress that we have in our day. How much sleep are we getting? Do we not eat the right things because work's really hard out? Those other factors that Mason mentioned when we did that session in class, like every little thing kind of contributes to a disease. It's not just something that develops alone. Yes, please. So there was this interesting study that happened over on the East Coast. It's called Ngāti and Healthy study, and actually they found that 50% of the people on the coast either had diabetes or were on their way to getting diabetes. So that's quite a lot. When I say on their way to diabetes, you get diagnosed kind of like pre-diabetes. So either you have the insulin resistance or impaired glucose tolerance. If you do get diagnosed with pre-diabetes, it's kind of that warning shot that I talked about, or that red flag that I talked about with gestational diabetes as well. So you don't have the full-blown thing yet, but it's more than likely you're going to get it if you don't start to make some changes. And we don't want that. We want you to change and to be well. So does anyone know why some of these symptoms of diabetes occur? So I've got a list up here, you know, tiredness, loss of energy, thirsty, weight loss, all those types of things. Does anyone have any ideas why you might be more tired? No? Okay, so when you've got all this glucose in your blood, but it can't get into the cells where it's needed, obviously we're not going to have the energy or the fuel that we require to do the things we need to do. What about increased urination? So why would you need to go to the bathroom more? Well, glucose is the excess glucose that we have in our blood. It can't get out. The only way it can get out is through our urine, where everything else that we don't need gets excreted. So it kind of is tied into the thirstiness as well. So you're not getting any energy, you're having increased bathroom breaks, and you need more water to sort of flush that out. In terms of weight loss, so again, we're not getting the glucose into our cells, so the body will start to pull away at our muscles and release the glucose from our muscles to feed our brain, because glucose is the only thing that can kind of fuel our brain to think. In terms of blurred vision or poor eyesight, you know, glucose is a really big fat molecule, and the little capillaries and little small blood vessels behind our eyes can't handle having too much glucose, try and jam in there, and it starts to kind of damage them. So you'll see quite a lot of people have eye tests and will sometimes result in blindness if it's not well controlled. I think diabetes for Māori is the main cause of blindness, so it is something to consider. For urinary and skin infections, because the glucose isn't being used to, say, fight the infection, it instead feeds it because it's still in the blood. So, you know, if you get a cut or a scrape, normally when you're healthy, it will start to heal. However, when you're diabetic, it's the sugar or the glucose actually feeds that infection. It makes it harder to fight it, to heal it. Yeah, so you might, particularly in places where we start to lose feeling, so in our fingers and toes, again, the blood vessels are really small, and as they get damaged by the glucose, you know, they can actually lose feeling in them. And then if they get a cut and an infection and don't realize, within a couple of days, it can just escalate. Yeah, it's quite common for uncontrolled diabetics to get, you know, toes amputated, or so severely as, you know, maybe losing a foot or a finger or something, which is not very nice. Okay, thanks. I keep doing the wrong thing. Okay, so how do we control it? Well, we talked a little bit before about moving. We saw that effect of exercise on controlling the amount of glucose in our blood. So yeah, we need to move. Medication is also really important. If you're type 1 and relying on insulin, or even if you're type 2 but you need insulin, then you know, getting that sorted is also important. And then our food. So food plays a huge role in diabetes. Obviously, the glucose has to come from somewhere, and it comes from our carbohydrate food. So yeah, really, if we can control that and move some more, then, you know, the medication can sometimes become less of an issue, and for some, you don't even need to have it, but for others, it's really important too. Cool. So, yeah, focusing on why they need to eat better, we need to keep that blood sugar at a really constant level. So You don't want to have really big peaks in your day of lots and lots of blood glucose, and you don't want to have hardly any either. So hyper and hypo amounts of blood sugar. The way that you can do this is to kind of balance out the amount of starchy carbohydrate foods at each meal instead of having them all in one go. So a little bit for breakfast, a little bit at lunch, a little bit at dinner. So nice and balanced, not just eating, say, a loaf of bread in the morning and then that's you. I'm trying to avoid food with too much sugar. So I suppose, you know, with the whole I quit sugar and I'm sugar-free diet kind of thing, there's been a lot more awareness around the amount of sugar in our food, but there is still lots of it that is hidden, and kind of cutting down on those really sugary foods, like something like a fizzy drink, for example. It's just straight sucrose, so it doesn't really take that much for our body to access the glucose and for it to be in our blood straight away, versus say if you had a kumara or with some chicken and stuff, like it's going to be slightly different. I guess another thing is that you don't actually need special diet foods, you just need to be eating really well. And when I say really well, I mean the same recommendations we make for an adult, a healthy adult. Like you should be having lots of veggies, you should be having some protein, you should be having some carbohydrate, and really trying to get more nutrients, like we've discussed before. Yeah, but for the ones that are on medication, it is really important that they do see like a dietitian or a nurse specialist, and working with their doctor to make sure everything is sweet and tailored to them, because everybody kind of is a little bit different. Yeah. So yeah, eat regularly, avoid foods that are really sugary, and also avoid foods with too much fat. So in one of the diagrams before, I also talked about how, you know, having excess fat around our organs and around our puku can actually impair the body's ability to use its own insulin effectively, and we also don't want to have any more weight gain, because it will set off those triggers and perhaps not just take it from diabetes but to something else as well. Yeah. So just wanted to touch now on the glycemic index. You'll see this little graph here. There's a light blue line and it goes shooting up to the top and then it drops back down, and then a dark blue line that is sort of a more gentle curve. So one is a high glucose response, so in other words a high GI response, which is the light blue where it goes shooting up, and then the other one, the dark blue, is like a lower glucose response. So these two responses here are different measurements of how carbohydrate foods affect the level of glucose in our blood. So high GI one is that rapidly absorbed one. It's that thing that sends the blood glucose levels or the blood sugar levels like through the roof. Whereas the lower GI kind of releases it a little bit more slowly. They get just digested and absorbed slightly differently and at a slower rate. And if our goal as a diabetic is to keep our blood glucose or blood sugar level at a relatively constant level, then you can see being able to be aware of what foods might shoot it up or bring it back down or keep it even could be beneficial. So yeah, we would want like very little up and down on that graph if we were a diabetic. We would want it somewhere relatively constant in the middle. So yeah, it's kind of a way for us to predict it. So some high GI foods are things that something really sugary, like if I think about a jelly bean or yeah, fizzy drink, or it'll just, again, the glucose is just absorbed so quickly and so released so quickly into our blood that there's not really, it doesn't really do anything else other than like, hey, I'm in here, I'm running around, I'm ready to go. But which is fine if you're a healthy adult, but if you're not, then perhaps you need to think about that. Some of our low GI foods are things with a bit more fibre and sometimes a little bit more fat, and they're a little bit slower, more slowly digested. These sometimes will help us stay full for longer as well. So lots of our whole grains, oats, and yeah, there's other foods as well that, depending on the way they're cooked or prepared, will change the glycemic response. So yeah, it's all to do with the amount of starch and the way that the carbohydrate is made up. But yeah, it is a good tool to use in terms of balancing it out. There's also things you could add to your pie. So say if you're having a cracker, you could have some cheese on it or something, and it will change the way that the glucose is released into your blood because it has something else to compete with. It's just not a straight source of sugar. Yeah. So I've just got a few questions here. Yeah, you don't have to do them today, but they're just all around, like how low GI carbohydrates can be beneficial. So low GI diets help people, well, actually they help people lose and maintain weight. They can also increase the body's sensitivity to insulin. They can help improve your diabetic control, and they can also help reduce the risk of heart diseases too, which is awesome. They also help reduce the blood glucose levels, and they help reduce cholesterol and also keep you fuller for longer, and they can also help with physical endurance or exercise endurance. So people that are going to go out and do a big long run or marathon or tri-multi, whatever it might be, these are the foods that are going to help you keep going for longer. So we would usually say to have those, at the start of your day, and then you would use the higher GI carbs throughout your event to give you that little bit of boost, a little bit of energy to keep going. Also, GI is one tool. We're trying to figure out what to have when you're a diabetic, but we also want you to think about the whole food as well. So, we still want you to consider fat, we still want you to consider salt, we still want you to consider fiber, because all of those are still really important too. And that they're going to have an effect on how your body uses blood glucose and everything. So, like everything, nothing works in isolation. So here are some tips to how to switch to a low GI diet. Things like using oats or barley or bran, whole grains. It's interesting that potatoes is one of those foods. I said you could change the way that it has an effect on your glycemic index depending on how it's prepared. So when it's hot, straight out of the oven or mashed, it's going to have a lot higher GI than if it's been cooled and left overnight. So for diabetics, if they do really, really love potatoes, then hey, maybe make a potato salad the next day or something with the leftovers, or just reduce the amount they have and try and have it with some other protein and veggies and stuff. We still want you to have a really good variety of fruit and veg, and just trying to be aware of the carbohydrate content and some of the other foods. Yeah, and increasing your fibery foods too, so things like legumes, baked beans, all that can help too. Exercise for diabetes. Yeah. So again, regular activity has been shown to increase the ability of our body to be able to use the glucose. So using that backdoor analogy, we'll let more in. Doing it regularly. Our body does really, really like routine. From our food to our exercise, that's just what it likes. And it does help you kind of get better control if it's not just thrown into the deep end and all of a sudden you don't have any fuel for it to use, or you've got too much and I just can't use it. So trying to get into a good routine is always encouraged. Exercise also, it can help reduce obviously different things that can influence the way that we use insulin and glucose. So it'll, yeah, if you did it regularly enough, it would help you lose weight. So perhaps reducing some of that central fat that I was talking about, that can help, that can affect the way that insulin is used and takes the glucose into the cell. Yeah. I'd say for type 1s though, if they're going to start doing like lots of high intensity, high endurance, long endurance exercise, then they probably would need to check with their specialist team so that they're not all of a sudden going to be in a really big low. Yeah, that can be a little bit tricky to manage, but hey, there's some really fantastic cyclists and triathletes that manage to be type 1 diabetic and still compete for their countries and stuff, so it can't be impossible. In terms of drinking, fizzy and energy drinks, juice, those are really high sugary foods, as we know. They also have a really high GI, so they're going to shoot your glucose through the roof, and then it's just going to drop away again. So you probably want to avoid those if we're trying to keep our blood glucose levels kind of constant. Tea and coffee, you wouldn't really think about it too much, but they can be something that we need to be aware of. If you're having too many, it can help accelerate dehydration, particularly when, one of those symptoms of diabetes is that you need to go to the bathroom a lot more because it's trying to get rid of that excess glucose. And also the amount of sugars we add to our cups of tea and stuff can definitely have an effect. In terms of alcohol, like most most guidelines, you kind of want to avoid that or limit it. It also is one of those really quickly absorbed sources of sugar, so it's going to send it in a sharp peak again, just like the fizzy drinks, but it doesn't really provide anything else for us. It doesn't have any extra nutrients. If diabetics did want to drink, then perhaps the best idea is to have it with food, because then the absorption is going to be slowed, because it has to have something to compete against, and it will help manage that and not shoot it through the roof and then drop completely off in terms of our glucose levels. So I've touched on a few of the complications, blindness, not being able to heal properly, and over time just the damage that really large glucose molecule can do to different parts of our body is quite astounding. So yeah, getting into those small blood vessels and causing damage in our feet and our eyes and our fingers, and eventually, putting extra strain on our kidneys, because they've got to constantly try and excrete and get rid of this this huge amount of glucose. Yeah, and I'm sure you've all heard the damage that kidney failure can do, and how awful that could be for some whānau. So we want to avoid that at all costs. Yeah, and yeah, because our whole body has to work harder, basically. Yeah. So just a couple of things, like it can't be cured, diabetes, but it could be well controlled. In terms of type 2 diabetes, there's definitely ways that you can manage more effectively and get back to a relatively normal life without having to rely on lots of medication or insulin. I think trying to stay away from insulin is probably the biggest thing, and then also to prevent kidney failure would be the main goals. If you do want to get your screening done for all your mamas, that would be awesome. If you do get diagnosed with pre-diabetes, like again, that's a little red flag for you. You need to start making some changes. Get moving, maybe check out what you're doing with your food, go and talk to somebody, and particularly for all our over 40s, we should be providing blood glucose checks, yeah, through our health providers and stuff. Yeah, and I think, because the recommendations are quite broad, they encourage to eat well, to keep moving. Like, there's something that we can all do, and get alongside our whānau members that may have diabetes or may be prone to getting diabetes. Yeah, and it's something we do need to take quite seriously, but we can change the way, and we can definitely change the outcome if we stay on top of it. If you did have any extra questions or queries, please feel free to fire them through around diabetes. And also a really good site or resource to use is Diabetes New Zealand. They keep it really up to date with the different recommendations, provide lists of different foods, recipes, all the different types of diabetes as well. And I'm sure locally you guys have people that in your teams or maybe that you know where you can access support for whānau with diabetes, which is choice 2. Cool.